Hello, we're going to go over the hard surface shader. I've made a bunch of updates. This isn't version 3, this is more like version 195. But this thing is still evolving, but as it stands now, this is how we're going to use it. So I have an asset here, which is a quite large storage tank. So just take this there. As you can see, it looks very reflective and all that jazz. So this is how I always start out my materials. First thing I do is set diffuse color to 0, specular color to whatever I kind of want it to be for kind of a shiny metal. In this case, it looks chromium, but I'm going to be adding textures to it. So this is how I start every hard surface shader. So the shader needs to be set to hard surface, and we're going to start by adding a diffuse. So we're going to add a base metal. So let's add a base metal texture, diffuse and normal map. This is the only layer that will actually use the gloss map from the alpha of the normal map in this shader. This is due to a number of things, but mainly a limitation with how alphas are used in the texture slots. So this is kind of how I start every project with this kind of material that has a metal, raw metal underneath it, and a paint layer, and rust, and dirt, and grime, and etc. So we're going to start with the assumption that this is how we want to set this up. First thing I'm going to do, once I have the base material supplied, is I'm going to add my second layer. So let's add our second layer. As you can see, it kind of breaks everything, but that's okay. So I'm going to set this layer to, well, white, because this is a tint. So let's just set the glossy to 1. And by default, by the way, this is all the default settings. So I'm just going to put everything to default so we can kind of go through the process together. Alright, so in my layer 2 diffuse, I'm going to pick a paint. So go to paint, pick a diffuse, and in L2 normals, for now, we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so here's our base kind of setup. Looks kind of iffy, we're not taking advantage of the shader yet. So next up we need the RGBA mask, which is our asset. So this should be the only texture that you have with assets using the hard surface shader. So we're going to go to our assets where this is stored. As you see, it's the only texture in here. So we're going to hit OK. So as you can see now, our scratches have showed up. Our scratch layer has showed up. You can see them clearly here. Our second layer, which is this paint layer, is now color controllable. So this texture is basically 4 layers of masks all in one texture. So I have the paint layer, the selective paint layer, the rust, and the dirty sort of grime, sunburn looking texture. So I'm just going to go through this really quick since you're going to be able to tweak all your stuff on your own. But we're now going to start by adding our second layer, or third technically, third layer. So we're going to add our third layer, which is our kind of paint layer here. We're going to go ahead and use the same textures here. So let's use our diffuse. Layer 3. Okay, now the layer 3 diffuse needs to go in emittance. This is because this texture slot pretty much 100% refuses to rename, and there's not really anything I can do about that. So I'm just going to take the tint color off of this real quick. And let's put the layer 3 normal in there. Okay, now we have that. So then I'm just going to, not in that one, in this layer 3 color, I'm just going to give it a slight tint. In this case, let's do something else. Let's do... Nah, you know, I guess I kind of like that. Okay, so now we have a pretty basic looking item, but it's starting to look better. Let's go ahead and add our 4th layer. Okay, now this is the rust layer, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and add a rust texture to the layer 4 diffuse. Oops. this is going to be in my textures folder. Here's our diffuse. Oops, that's an M, not an N. There we go. Alright, and our normal's loaded and everything, looking nice. Let's go ahead and let's check our UVs. I kind of want more of that color. See, this color variation looks nice. Okay, so I'm going to look at just the albedo here. It looks a little too uniform for me, so we're going to use a very cheap feature. And this is our basic grunge layer, which fits into the fourth part of our RGBA texture. So it's in the alpha. This is kind of just a grungy sunburnt variation map. Now, the reason this is cheap is because it doesn't load any new textures. It simply takes data that already exists and does a very simple multiply just by a mask. So we're basically just taking this color here, this layer of grunge color. So let's put it to black for now, and we'll go ahead and increase that. So as you can see with this, it kind of adds a much nicer, more varied look to it, and we can kind of adjust the mask itself to give it a nice overall. Oh, had a little glitch there with my, I accidentally closed my shader compiler, so it kind of froze. So anyway, back to where we were before. So now that we have this kind of nice color variation in our albedo, I'm just going to make a couple of small tweaks to this that will kind of give us a pretty nice looking result, because I want to see a little bit more of this kind of grunge here, but I don't want to see it be as intense. So let's just kind of make it look more like that, and then let's just add a kind of a little bit of a different shade of green in there just to kind of lighten that up. And now we have some really nice color variation, especially down in here. We got some intact paint, and just overall has much more variation, and I think looks dustier and a little bit more realistic. So now we're going to go into each buffer and we're going to look at some things. So these are some large scale things, but I don't want it to be that large scale. So I'm going to take the layer 2 UVs. Well, here, before I do anything else, I'm going to close these guys. There we go. And let's maximize the window. So I'm going to take the layer 2 UV scale, and I'm just going to increase that a little bit. I'm going to kind of place those cracks so they are in a nice spot that feels pretty realistic. Looks nice. Okay. So you can kind of get this nice look where the paint's cracking up into the cracks, and sometimes you can just get lucky and it looks really nice. I'm just going to reduce the opacity of that grunge layer just a little bit more. Kind of make it just a bit more subtle. I think I might just darken that green a tad. Alright, so let's go through each buffer. The normal looks nice. The smoothness needs a little bit of loving. So each layer has a glossy. So I'm just going to just start tweaking these a little bit. I want just a little bit more wet look, or not wet look, but I want the paint to look like it still has some areas that are a little bit, I don't want that much. Let's do something like that. And then let's do something more. And let's take our layer 2 glossy and let's just kind of crank that up a little bit. I want to get these kind of nice highlights here. I think it's a little too much, so let's bring that back down. Kind of like that. And that's still too high. Okay. Oh, my reflectance is low. That's why I'm having a hard time. So the reflectance is the specular value in here. So let's just increase that so it's just a little bit higher. Okay, this is more along the lines of what I'd expect to see. So let's go ahead and increase that gloss. Yeah, that's much better. That was looking a little bit weird. I like to have that nice highlight. Maybe just spread that out a little bit more. There we go. Looking good. All right, let's go back to reflectance. Okay, it's a little bit less. What's my reflectance now? This is a little high for paint, so I'm going to bring that down something to more like there. Still a bit high, but I like how it looks. All right, don't like how those shadows are, so I'm going to reduce my const bias to 0.4. There we go, that looks much nicer. Okay, a couple of last things here. We have a pretty nice asset. It's got some nice color variation. It looks pretty nice. We get some cool looking stuff in here. This is all well and good. But we kind of want to add a little bit more to this, or just maybe let's just change some things. So there's another option here called Generate Layer Normals. This one, I believe for most people should be pretty familiar, but this will add, the first layer will generate some normals. So let's just bring down the offset a little bit. Let's make it low, and just jack up the strength. Let's just touch it. So this basically add these nice scrapes will add some nice normal detail to them. This isn't necessary for an asset like this, but for the purposes of this example, I figured why not. Okay, we're looking pretty good in all of our buffers. I don't feel like we've strayed too much. This specular is just a little low. Let's go to our third layer specular. Let's just increase that a little bit. Oh, let's look at albedo. That's looking nice. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go over some features now, some shader features. I'm not going to go over normal pass-through because this one's not quite complete yet, but basically what it does, it's going to allow the normals from your base material or your secondary layer to kind of pass through your other layers. So for instance, you could actually save loading 2 or 3 normal maps if your paint texture, if you just want your paint texture to be on all your layers. So it'll just save you loading normal maps that you don't need to load, and it'll save you memory and performance and all that jazz. It's not for everything, and you can adjust what each layer does, but it will be quite nice. So I'm going to go over the debug masks here. And basically what this does is this allows us to look at each mask independently. So I'm going to turn off the grunge layer. It's just a little more clear. So this will match what you have in Photoshop in each layer. So I'm going to type in 2. So here's our, I believe it's the green channel? Yeah, the green channel mask. And here is the blue channel, or yeah, blue channel mask. So this just allows you to see your masks. And if you're going to go in and use either the adjust masks or the derive masks option, then you will be able to see what you're doing a little bit easier. So in the cases of enabling both of these, this kind of, that's the wrong layer. Let's do the 4th layer. So this will just allow you to kind of control those masks independently. You have basically what this is let's see, there's should be a breakup mask you use. Yeah. It's too contrasty. So basically, the more soft your mask is, the more easily you can use these breakups to kind of like add a little bit of variation. I believe if I let's see, where's my breakup mask contrast? Okay. Yeah, so basically just lets you extend your blends. And like I said, this is a very harsh mask, so it's not going to show up the best. But it basically just gives you lots of things to kind of use to change up your masks, to change your blending, etc. And this just allows you to see what you want. Maybe you want to test it in here and then just do it in Photoshop. It's up to you. But it's just nice to be able to see your actual blend masks. So I figured I would add that feature. So I'm just going to turn that back off and use the grunge layer. Now note that the grunge layer is the cheapest, so if you have a material that's much simpler, like say you don't even need to vary this color, or you want to do it via another method, I can, let's say, disable the 3rd material, and you drop all of the performance related things, and so basically this is just a much more efficient model because you're only using, you know, a second layer and your fourth layer, which is in this case the rust. So let's go ahead and remove the rust. And so here's without the rust. And you could maybe use the grunge layer to kind of act more like a rust. But as you can see, depending on what you're doing, it can still be quite nice. And you can always, you know, change up some things. But for the most part, you know, it's pretty nice what you can do with this. And like I said, it's mostly for like hero assets or things that you need to have high detail that are large, but you don't want to have that kind of classic just tiling texture look. So I'm just going to turn everything back on. And we're going to do one last insane thing, as if this really needed it, but we're going to go ahead and add a detail map. So let's add, let's say a paint here. Let's add some paint rough lines, and let's go ahead and turn on detail mapping. Right. Let's set our detail tiling to 4x4. And let's go ahead and turn off our adjust masks because I don't really need it. My masks came out nice. And let's go ahead and increase this bump scale. Let's do that. There's my layer 2 glossy. Here it is. So this is way more detail than you need, but this adds some paint strokes to that. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. This is basically as insane as you can go with this sort of stuff, but it's really helpful if you just have that like one thing that you really want to have like up close and personal to the camera or whatever. This is just a very nice way to be able to do that, and it's really a helpful shader for if you just kind of want to go, you know, all out. And there's plenty of things that will be disabled over distance to save you performance. And your LODs can swap out for a cheaper version of the shader if you want by just assigning a different material ID to that. Yeah, so you can try this out for yourself. I'm actually going to put it up to those who ask for it. In the video description is something that you can email, and I'll give you a response if you want to test out the shader. So, yeah. I hope to see some work that you guys are doing with this, because it's a pretty fun shader to work with and opens up tons of new possibilities. So yeah, I'm out.